Hello.
Yes, sir. Please go.
Are you?
Hello, everyone. So, first and foremost thing, thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful webinar. Secondly, the most important is right now to take care of each one of us, our family, and our people around. So, I hope that all of you are safe in this COVID pandemic, and we will get over this COVID pandemic soon. Now, the topic assigned to me is one of the most globally talked about topic, that is environment. It is actually a passion and a fashion, and also a very important concern, not just for our state, not just for our country, but for the whole world and planet. So that itself signifies how important the topic is, environment. Now, global warming and environment protection are all elaborately discussed at the global summits by the United Nations, and in India, Environment Impact Assessment Draft is certainly Environment Impact Assessment Draft 2020 is certainly a burning topic. Now, what is EIA? EIA is the formal legal process for determining the impact of any project. In 1990, let's just look at the background of it. In 1994, the Ministry of Environment issued an EIA notification. Under the EIA notification, this gives permission clearances, that is environmental clearances for the projects, for certain projects and projects extension, like first initially for the project, and thereafter if there's anything to be made in the extension, then also clearance to be taken. And from that 1994 onwards, several amendments have been made in this clearance, in this environment impact assessment. Now, what is new is on March 23rd, 2020, the Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change have come up with a draft environment impact assessment notification. First of all, we should look at the timing of the notification. When our country was in a confused state of lockdown and worried, and also under when we are reeling, we still don't know, but that point of time we had no clue about how this COVID pandemic is going to affect us. So at that point of time, the notification was published in the website and suggestions were sought. Now let us look at the draft of this environment impact assessment notification. We will look at the opinion of the experts from the field. We will look at the examples of the environment impacts that has happened. We will look also at the international, our commitments, India's commitments internationally, and then we will also conclude. So the experts from the field, what they say is that a detailed analysis on the draft EIA reveals that these regulations will seriously weaken the existing environmental regulations and promote high risk activities. Like, contrary to the well-established principles of precautionary approaches, intergenerational equity and sustainable development as recognized in the environmental law and policy all throughout, we have been trying to incorporate the sustainable development concept for many years now to the Indian law. The experts also say that this new EIA continue to rely on ineffective institutional design, which means that in the institutional design which is in place is actually does not satisfy with the requirements of effective implementation, post clearance monitoring, transparency and accountability, and strict punishment of environmental violators. When the existing strict law itself do not give seriousness, how is a relaxed or watered down EIA going to help us save the environment is the issue in question. Further, this reduces steadily the shrinking spaces for public participation. What is what is the essence of environment impact assessment? Is you or anybody else, any citizen want to raise a voice, raise the concern that space is being reduced now to very minimal. So what does it say? It says once the space is reduced, it says that they are again making it very not public friendly, instead making it industrial friendly. And also there's a introduction of a slew of new irrational new exemptions and very new processes, particularly the process of post facto clearances that are contrary to the well established and globally accepted principles of environment impact assessment. Because what happens is, as per the EIA, you need not take permission. You can give permission ex post facto, means something what is started, you can start and then later take the permission. So the magnitude of the issue can be guessed by what could go wrong if anybody is allowed to just go ahead and then at some point of time taking permission. And in another stated purpose of achieving effective regularly regulating harmful environment activity, that is becoming more ineffective by the coming of this EIA 2020, and complying with our constitutional vision towards environment, democracy, justice, everything is being questioned. Further, the lack of dissemination of these draft regulations in vernacular languages. See, in the beginning of lockdown, when a draft is published in English or Hindi, how will it get translated to the vernacular languages like Tamil or Telugu or Malayalam? And how will the experts in the local, everybody cannot understand Hindi or English. Our experts are there locally who understand the vernacular language. And in the middle of a global pandemic like this, a lack of meaningful efforts to proactively facilitate public debate or public opinion on the proposed changes through regional public forums are all lost. So that was also a cause of serious concern, because there's not been effective public discourse and discussion about this draft. Now, we agree, certainly there is an urgent need for a EIA regulation in India to anticipate and respond specifically to immediate and imminent challenges presented by climate change in the context of our country. Now, the draft EIA 2020, if we look at it, we understand there's a minimal consideration of the real and present risk of climate change, and also of India's international and domestic obligation in this context of climate change. The draft EIA 2020 is exceedingly inadequate. I would say it is exceedingly inadequate in treatment of the mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and human rights consideration raised by climate change and climate justice in the context of India. Before we say why is it so, we will look at what is India's current climate situation. India's current climate situation includes: 1. Skyrocketing pollution. 2. Increased biodiversity loss. 3. Rampant deforestation. 4. Increase in incidence of disease carrying insect vectors. 5. Increasing water insecurity. 6. Large-scale displacement of Adivasi and rural population due to climate disasters and development projects. 6. There's a rising overall temperature. 7, there is extreme weather events, including floods and heat waves and droughts in different parts of the country, which we are witnessing, which we are seeing every day on television, and which we are even experiencing ourselves. And then 8, there is an increasing insecurity of food systems and an overall increase in the vulnerable and precarious communities due to changing climates and associated effects. So all these, what I just said, what I just listed, strongly indicates that there is a critical need for well-designed laws, policies and regulations concerning the environment that focus on the specific of climate change and the best way how we can respond to the immediate and also the imminent crisis situations. Now, the current model of carbon intensive development in India also runs afoul of what climate science tells us is imperatively needed in terms of global mitigation effect. In fact, specific carbon intensive pathways such as increased coal mining, oil exploration, and coal-based energy production that the draft EIA 2020 seeks to fast-track further devastate the natural and environmental and imperil health, livelihood, well-being, and sustainable future for a large number of people in our country. Now, let us have a look at the international angle also. Article 4.1(f) of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. What does it say? It explicitly imposes an obligation on signatory countries. So are we a signatory country? Yes, India is certainly a signatory country to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So it imposes an obligation on the signatory countries to take climate change considerations into account to the extent feasible in their relevant social, economic, and environmental policies and actions. So internationally, are we bound to take into consideration the climate aspect in our laws? Yes, since we have signed it, we are bound to. Now let us look at the domestic. What does our National Green Tribunal say? Our National Green Tribunal 2019 order in Riddhima Pandey case. In Riddhima Pandey case, it is confirmed by the Green Tribunal that climate change consideration are certainly to be covered in the process of impact assessment, and has presumed, tribunal has presumed that Government of India is considering climate related factors while granting environmental clearances. So if you look at the international convention and the domestic National Green Tribunal order, it both clearly says that we should give primary importance to environment while giving clearances. Now, are we taking Article 4 of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and National Green Tribunal 2019 order in Riddhima Pandey case seriously? Is a question we have to think. Unfortunately, empirical study of the environmental clearances process in India show that no convincing indication that climate change considerations are an important part of the EIA. So there itself we have an issue. It is not, I repeat, that climate change considerations are not part of the EIA and also not part of the environmental clearance process. So the draft EIA 2020 shows no indication that the scientific, policy, legal, and moral considerations of climate change and its relation to India have been given careful thought. This is a massive lost opportunity to make India environmental friendly, India's clearance regime environmental friendly, among the best climate responsive regulatory framework regime in the world. See, something like environment is not something we make every day. So when we make it, we were supposed to make it tight. We were supposed to make it up to international standards. We were supposed to make it by complying with our commitment given internationally, and also what our green tribunal says in this thing. But unfortunately, the data says, and the act, the drafts, when the experts say it is not so. Therefore, the experts are of the opinion that draft EIA 2020 in current form is seriously flawed and dangerous and inconsistent with the best practices of responsible environment and climate regulations. Now, we will look at the research part of it. What does the research say? Now, research including the 2016 report of Controller and Auditor General of India on environmental clearance process in the country indicates. What does it indicate? It indicates that non-compliance of environmental conditions, poor monitoring, and shortcomings in the conduct of public hearings plague even in the existing process. Like tracing back to the earlier notification itself, the Controller and Auditor General's report says they are not happy with the public hearings are conducted. Now the new draft EIA exasperates this unhappy situation at a time when multiple climate crises are already upon us, and the need for a decisive and an urgent consideration on the climate action is required, and a more clearer action is required. Therefore, what is to be done? What we have to look at what is to be done in this context. So the draft EIA 2020 is to be scrapped in its entirely, and a new process for a strong, effective environmental clearance regulation in India should be immediately initiated based on truly deliberative, transparent, scientific, and pro-environment values and mechanisms. Now, what is the actual background of the entire thing? Now, if you look at the mitigation side of the issue, it is very important for the draft EIA 2020 to take note of the existing position under the Paris Agreement. India is again a signatory to the Paris Agreement 2015, which was instrumental in bringing together nations to undertake ambitious efforts to combat climate change and adapt to its effect. We will go happily sign everything, but when it comes to incorporating in our own laws, we are very backward, because Paris Agreement recognizes climate change as a global critical issue that needed immediate attention of citizens and world leaders alike. Further, the Paris Agreement expresses an in-principle commitment to strengthening the global response to climate change, including by holding increase in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and increasing the availability to adapt to the adverse impacts of climate change and foster climate resilience and low greenhouse gas emission development in a manner that does not threaten food production. Now, this may sound very technical, but to put it in simple words, we have to take necessary steps to maintain the temperature levels, pre-industrial levels, is what the essence of it says. The parties to the Paris Agreement were to undertake and communicate ambitious efforts in the form of nationally determined contribution. That is called NDCs. NDCs means, I repeat, it's nationally determined contributions to achieve the goals of the agreement. So, what is India's quantified nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement? One, under the Paris Agreement, we are bound to work to reducing the emission intensity of its gross domestic product by 33 to 35% relative to 2005 by 2030. Two, achieving 40% cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil fuel based energy resources by 2030. Three, creating an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon equivalent by 2030 through additional forest and tree cover. Thus, now in the current topic, the relevant question we need to ask is, does environment impact assessment take note of the Paris Convention? Unfortunately, the logics and provisions of the draft EIA 2020 seems to take scant note of the first of the above NDCs and actively works against the second and third NDCs by promoting coal mining, oil drilling, fossil fuel based energy production by facilitating expedited clearances in forested area with minimal safeguards, and by promoting unregulated projects by in terms of mega infrastructure projects that usually result in significant tree falling without effective checks and balance in place. On the impact and adaptation and resilient fronts, the situation looks even more worrisome. Now, okay, so from what I said, the basic issue to be understood is Paris Convention, which we are signatory, lays down certain things, but the EIA do not comply with or do not have effective provisions in the EIA to promote our commitment made in Paris Convention. Now let us again come back to India. Now Ministry of Earth Science, Government of India has recently released a book titled Assessment of Climate Change over the Indian Region. Let us look, what does it say? A fundamental finding of the book is that the temperature in India is set to rise by at least 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next 30 years, and that this will trigger a large rise in the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. Some of what are who is saying this? Ministry of Earth Sciences, Government of India. So when Ministry of Earth Sciences have given an opinion like this, when Government of India pass an act, pass a draft, what should they keep? They should keep in mind what are the steps we can incorporate to make this issue come down. What are the, see, when we say about temperature rise, we need to also look at what are the major consequences of temperature rise. Again, that is said in the same book report. They say that if with the temperature, the consequences of temperature rise, there'll be an increase in heat waves, there'll be increased variability of the monsoons, and an increase in the intensity of droughts and floods. Each of these actually, when we look, we are experiencing in our daily life. So whether it's flood, whether it's droughts, we get to see every time that this is what is happening. And the country will likely to face devastating effects, including heavy precipitation events such as flooding, tropical cyclones, increased number of hot days, coastal flooding from sea level rise, and high risk to coastal communities due to the loss of coastal ecosystems, significant impact on the economic growth, decreased food availability, severe negative impact on livestock, increased risk of vector-borne diseases, and increased extinction rate for plants, vertebrates, and insects. So when we think
Ma'am,
we
I have
should,
few questions, ma'am. Many participants want to ask few questions to you, ma'am. So there is a question that do you think that if the central government wanted to pass the law, wanted to pass the EIA law, should they have not gone to a vote for the people? And can you give your thoughts about that, ma'am? Instead of directly implementing it, should they have gone to a voting system where they would have asked the people or they should ask the states the opinion, ma'am?
see, the asking the opinion, you've asked a very relevant question. The government should certainly, they cannot just go ahead just by such a thing, because it waters down the entire provisions of the EIA. Something like that, when they are starting, taking it to people is one thing which they have done for the namesake by publishing it in the website and by notification and saying by June they are supposed to give the opinion. And then there was cases filed in Delhi High Court, and then only after that the from June 30th the date was extended and people could give opinion. But the issue is, okay, maybe directly to put in vote, maybe technically it will be difficult, but something like this, so serious, which needs to be complied with our international commitments and our national orders, they have not even put it as a discussion in the parliament, or they did not even wait for the draft to pass through the parliament. They could have waited for the parliament to take the opinion of the parliament, of the Lok Sabha, of the Rajya Sabha. But what we understand is environment impact assessment was hurriedly passed, not passed, draft is been hurriedly published, and the time is also given, which is over, because they wanted to give clearances urgently, because their priority, unfortunately the government's priority is not environment but to give clearances to their friends. So that is why there is a lot of issues, there's been lot of protest, there's been environmentalists and even legal persons from the field, and all these have been raising their voices against this environment draft. So to answer your question, yes, certainly they should have given a more thought to it and taken the public opinion more seriously by giving more time, and they should have certainly presented this in parliament and taken the parliament's view also.
Ma'am, there are a lot of questions
Now,
coming in. I'll just put across few questions, ma'am. Whatever you feel comfortable, you can go ahead and give an answer, ma'am. So we have a question from Sunil Kumar. Where can we find any guidance or the aims and objectives of EIA for us to understand? If there is any website or anywhere, ma'am, to understand, from Sunil Kumar, ma'am.
this is, see, if you actually look at the government's website, Ministry of Climate Change, they have issued the basic draft. But if you read the basic draft, it will be difficult for you to understand without explanation that what each of the things mean. So ideally, it would be some of the articles are there on environment impact assessments published by experts, and more than that, more than articles. Actually, there are a lot of the representations given by the experts. If we look at the representations given by the experts itself, we get an idea of what exactly this is and how it affects us, and why people are saying that this should be more seriously taken.
Ma'am, one more question, ma'am. Is there anything mentioned about absolute liability clause in the new EIA proposed by the union government, ma'am?
See, absolute liability is a very important subject, which our environmental law, strict liability and absolute liability, whether it is in the law of torts and also in the law of environment. But unfortunately, again, this environment impact assessment is when it water downs the whole thing, the environment is not given its due importance. So strict liability or absolute liability, the environment impact assessment do not discusses that. The environment impact assessment is something which says that, okay, before a project or regarding a project, these are the clearances which is to be taken. So as strict liability, absolute liability is part of our environmental law and tort law, but the current EIA actually waters down the absolute and strict liability, what should be part of our the environment law.
Ma'am, on behalf of all the participants, myself and our institution, we would like to thank you very much, ma'am, for coming and spending your valuable time and giving us a lot of valuable inputs about EIA, about new environmental policy, why it is flawed. Many people have various doubts. Many people we have many more questions to you. Actually, one person has asked, maybe, is there any sinister objective that the government is having behind this implementation of the EIA very quickly? They're trying, is the government trying to push things too fast? Is there any sinister plan? So can you just answer that on the last basis, your synopsis of that now?
That's exactly what I was trying to tell you. See, if the idea is to protect the environment, public hearing should be given importance. If public concerns have to be given importance. But what is the government doing by this environment draft EIA 2020 is that what has been categorized as A and B1, for them project clearances are required. But what has that itself is not sufficient, but what has been categorized as B2, even that basic eyewash requirement is also not required. So all these shows that they do not want the environment to be protected. Instead, they only want the industries to flourish by compromising. See, we will never say industry should not flourish. Industries are part of, development growth. We certainly want, but sustainable development being the most important thing, this government has clearly prioritized prioritized industrial development by compromising on the environment fact of it. So it is very critical for a project that in the initial steps itself, the project should determine and document how the proposed project contributes to the impact of environment. But this does not happen. As per the new EIA, you can even take ex post facto clearance, which means you don't have to take it now, you can take it later. So which itself means how you can imagine that that itself is a big issue. Now, if I take an example, a good example to consider is the recent disaster involving in Oil India Limited in Assam. What Oil India Limited has been carrying out its operation is that they were supposed to expand it. They give the documents, but they did not give. And then there was a lot of issues in that thing, and which resulted in big, it affected totally the environment and the surroundings of that oil India in Assam. So that
Thank
is
you
why
very much,
such
ma'am. You have given
instances
us a
will
lot of
happen. We
valuable.
should be all that should be avoided. That's why the opposition parties have been regularly saying that government should reconsider. Not just the opposition parties, also the experts from the field have been saying that this should be reconsidered by giving more importance to environment while giving clearances. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Glad
very
to be
much,
part
ma'am.
of this.
Thank you very much, ma'am. On behalf of all the participants, myself, our institution, we would like to thank you for spending your valuable time and educating us on various important aspects of the new environment policy, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am. It now gives